You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. Hello and welcome to Garibaldi Red, the Nottingham Forest podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. My name is Matt Davis and we're doing something a bit different today, looking at football management, because we all criticise managers after results, so I thought it'd be good to have some kind of insight into what the job is actually like. So we're joined by two former Forest managers to discuss the ins and outs of being a manager. First joining us is former Reds manager Frank Clark, who also managed Leyton Orient and Manchester City. Frank, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, good morning, Matt. I'm surviving.
That's all we can ask for at the moment.
Well, it can be expected.
And our second guest is former Forest, Portsmouth, Chesterfield, Barnsley. I might be missing someone. Manager Paul Hart. Good morning, Paul. Are you well?
Morning, Matt. Yes, very well, thank you.
Good. Frank, I see you're not quite out of the game because you watch Forest all the time, but you've had a long career. And Paul, you're still very much in the thick of it in the Championship as first team coach at Luton. So no longer a manager, but in the game still. I suppose I wanted to ask, first of all, why would anyone want to be a manager? Because I don't go into my job thinking it's going to go all right for a few weeks, and then as soon as it goes bad, I'm going to get sacked. So you're almost on a bit of a hiding to nothing as a manager. So Frank, why did you want to be a manager?
Well, I had to find a job when I stopped playing, and I'd always fancied going into coaching and management. I didn't have a burning desire to be a manager, but I got a good opportunity to start as an assistant manager at Sunderland and went on from there. I think the thing about managing, especially today, you have to really want to do it. It's no good going into it half-hearted. It's become a very, very difficult job, and you have to really, really want to do it and apply yourself 100% to it.
Is that something you can empathise with, Paul? Seeing the pressure Nathan Jones is under in jobs. I mean, did you even want to be a manager yourself?
I sort of got the feeling when I came to Nottingham Forest. I was 30 when I came to Nottingham Forest. And of course, I worked with Brian Clough, who was, to me, he was inspirational, and a coach in a very different way, the way we look at coaching now, but acceptable. And then I went to work at Sheffield Wednesday, and for the first time, really, I saw prepared coaching sessions and tactical shapes taking place when I started when I was managed by Howard Wilkinson, and at that point that really sparked my interest, and he suggested I did my A license at that point while I was still playing, and I did it. I went to Lilleshall and did it. Didn't find it easy at all. But I was starting to get my head round. I enjoyed the tactical element that went with it. So, I still carried on playing, and then I broke my leg at Birmingham, and accepted a post at Notts County as player coach. And from there, the sort of bug and the desire to become a manager was probably formed through those latter years of my playing career.
When you took your first job, Paul, is it hard not to do your best impression of Brian Clough and Howard Wilkinson combined and just try and be the manager you think you should be rather than the manager you want to be? Well,
it is difficult, but there are so many things. I mean, Frank worked with Brian Clough for far longer than I did, and he will tell you there were, that you would have looked at managers that you've worked with and taken or tried to use the best things that they gave you, and I could never be anything like Brian Clough, but there are certain principles that were about our football club, Nottingham Forest, that for me, are eternal. And then with Howard, I learned so much from him, and so much has stayed, and again, not in the same street as Howard Wilkinson by any means, but I was grateful to both those managers for the little bits of things they gave me, because I'm not ashamed to say I've used it.
Does that ring true?
The managers.
Does that ring true to you, Frank? Plagiarising managers to be the best manager you can be?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think it's true for everyone who you pick up things during your life. You work with people and you see the good things that they do and the things that work and the things that don't work. You take all them in, and then it comes out of you, and it's your personality and your character that decides whether you'll be successful or not. Especially today, every would-be manager, probably every manager, has done all the courses, they've soaked up all the knowledge, they know how to coach, they know about putting on drills and all that, but some are not going to be successful and some are going to be absolutely very successful. So that's what you do. I mean, as Paul says, there's no way I would ever try to be like Brian Clough. I mean, I played for a manager at Newcastle called Joe Harvey, who was totally different. And I learned more at Newcastle from the coaches, people like Jimmy Greenhoff, Keith Birkinshaw, Dave Smith. But you take all these things in. Some you discard, some you think, yeah, I'm going to do that when I get the chance. And then it comes out with your personality as you.
Do you think a manager needs to start at the bottom then, Frank, and work their way up?
Not necessarily. It's a good way. The problem is in the game today, that sort of thing very rarely happens. I mean, when I first started, obviously before Paul, you could do that. Brian Clough started Hartlepool. You can't get much lower than that in the Football League. I mean, Hartlepool had to apply for re-election about 3 years in a row. And he was able to work his way up, but it's very, very difficult to do that today. But obviously, the more experience you've got at doing the job, as you do move up the levels to a bigger club, because the problems, whilst they're more or less the same, you've still got to win football matches no matter where you're at. The pressure, obviously, is much greater.
Do you think there's a template to be a good manager, Paul? Because no one can be the total package. I mean, Ferguson must have had weaknesses, and Wenger, and so on and so forth. So, is there an archetypal good manager?
Well, like Frank was alluding to there, managers are made up of many different components, and probably we're all different. And to copy is dangerous as well. But I remember reading a quote from Sir Matt Busby, who, when asked what would be the first question you would ask of a potential manager coming in, he said, and Matt Busby replied, "Are you lucky?"
Yeah, great one.
And you do need. I mean, you look at Sir Alex was a game away from probably going out the door, and he was saved in, was it at Oxford in the
Oldham,
or something like that? Yeah, by the now Coventry manager scoring a goal. And we all say looks a component that you don't need. You have to put that to one side, but you have to have a certain amount of good fortune in your career, I think. Along with, undoubtedly, and Frank knows more than me. Managers now we're almost on the European circuit of 2 years and off, and 1 year maybe, and we've got an awful lot of foreign managers coming into this country who are used to that. They are travellers, and it's changing. The face of management is changing, and preparation, presentations, detail that you give players. It's endless.
I mean, are you glad you're not a manager, Frank, now?
Well, I read in the paper yesterday that there's a manager in the Premier League on £15 million a year. So I wouldn't mind having a go at that.
You would never take the drop, Frank.
I mean, I'm glad I'm out of it now because I'm too old. I haven't got the energy anymore. But it's just a different set of problems. And as Paul says, you have to accept that you have to survive. That's the key to it. And Howard Wilkinson, Paul's been talking about, was also a great mentor to me, although I never actually worked for him. But I spent a lot of time with him. And you have to accept what the situation is going to be. And you get the job, you go in, you've got a contract for however long. But you have the realization that if you don't succeed, you'll probably get the sack. But things are better than that at respect today because the LMA are much stronger. And most managers, not everybody, but most managers, when they get the sack, the contractual details are sorted out very, very quickly. Whereas in my time when I first started, you might have to wait a year or 2 years to get the money that you were due in your contract. And clubs used to use that time to try and starve you out, if you like, force you into accepting another job so they didn't have to pay you so much compensation.
Have either of you ever taken a job where you've gone in a good situation? I mean, when both of you came into Forest, they weren't exactly perfect scenarios. Have either of you ever had a job where you've been able to hit the ground running, or has it always been going in and having to fight some fires initially?
Well, some are better than some are worse than others,
Well, me personally,
I mean, Forest.
Sorry,
Paul. Forest was a difficult situation, but there were an awful lot of pluses to it. I knew the club. I knew how it worked. I knew we had a core of good players, but they just had a couple of difficult years because Brian hadn't been too well for a couple of years, and the club had gone down a little bit, and there were quite a few problems off the pitch that I had to address. But I knew that I'd given a bit of luck, which Paul mentioned, and every manager needs a bit of luck. I did think that I had a chance of turning it around quickly.
What about you, Paul? Have you ever taken a job in a good situation?
No, not really. Nottingham Forest for me was a good job, a good situation, because although huge financial restrictions were placed upon me as manager, I knew that given time that what I was doing as an academy manager and what my staff were doing would pay dividends. And so I've never had any real money at football clubs or anything like that. But the Nottingham Forest situation was the best for me because I knew what we got, and I could see down the line. And then, we played our kids, and fortunately, our recruitment policies were good, and our upbringing was good, and we could put young players in. Although, the majority were sold over a period of time. That's about the best situation I've had, but really because I knew the club and I knew what was around, and for me it was a huge challenge, and with everything, and Frank probably will touch on this as well, because he's with a great respect, Frank is far more. I go to Frank and ask questions of what shall I do and all that. So he stands very high in my order of respected confidence and things like that. But you also need the support of people above you, and if that's not there, life becomes even more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. One of these skills that a manager needs today, probably more so than certainly when I first went into it, he needs to be able to manage up. Not only has he got to manage the dressing room and his staff, he needs to be able to build a relationship with the owners. Because most owners today have much more power, influence, say, for want of a better word, than when we played. I mean, I know managers who used to treat their directors with absolute contempt, not mentioning any names. You can't do that today. You have to be able to manage up and deal with the owners. I mean, we were trying to get Sean O'Driscoll on this this program today. I would have found that quite interesting, because I was like an ambassador when Sean got the manager's job at Forest when the Al Hassawis were in charge, and Sean couldn't manage up. He didn't want to know, really, and I felt sorry for him because he never managed a big club like Forest were. He was a very good coach, but he just didn't want to know the owners. So he had no kind of relationship at all. And I think that's what cost him his job ultimately. So managers have to be able to do that these days. You can't just dismiss when the chairman asks you a question. You can't just say it's none of your business. You've got to have a relationship with them now, or it'll get you in the end.
Was that what you found? I think in your career, Paul, would Portsmouth be the best example of that? That must have been a very difficult job for you when Portsmouth were trying to stay in the Premier League, and it sounded like they had a lot of problems.
Yeah, because I took that job on as a caretaker. I brought Brian Kidd in with me, and he was a massive help. And it was working with the chief exec more than anything. Never really met the owners. The owners were Israeli, who went into the family had great difficulties financially at the time, and we had to work with the players, but I had no real contact with owners or anything. It was a close working relationship with the chief exec, and but I recognise exactly what Frank's saying. And Howard Wilkinson, when I went in there as academy manager in '92, said that, you're in here, do the job. He was brilliant. He allowed me to find my feet and everything. But he said, if you want anything, don't come to me. You have to, anything that's needed financially, whatever, you need to go to the chairman or the chief exec, Bill Fotherby, Leslie Silver, and talk to them, and you have to manage. And he was teaching me.
Yeah, very good.
He was putting me in there to learn what was necessary for the future. And I've got to be perfectly honest. The wonderful club Nottingham Forest is. I probably failed on that point at the time I was there. I was appointed by a board, and very quickly afterwards run by an owner, and there were difficulties, but not in a rude way or anything like that. But it was to my detriment that I probably should have worked harder.
What about you at Man City, Frank? I mean, that's not the club it is now, but that's a hell of a job. And what was it like working there? I think I read you found out you got the bullet by local media or something, listening to the radio. That must have been an unusual job for you.
Yeah, it was a wrong move for me. I should never have taken the job. I was still a little bit scarred from what had happened at Forest, and the job came along. I was sold a bit of a false prospectus, if you like. When I met Francis Lee, who was the chairman, He told me that the board, there'd been a lot of infighting in the past, which I knew about, that the board were all united as one, and they had fantastic training facilities. And when I got there, I found that neither of those were true, really. There were 2 or 3 factions on the board who owned shareholdings, but nobody held a majority. If I could say one thing, the best kind of club to join is one where you have a benign dictator. Unfortunately, dictators don't tend to be very benign, or they're a bit thin on the ground. But if you have one guy who is in charge, who owns more than 50% of the club, that's the best way to be. I worked for a bloke at Leyton Orient. It was an incredibly difficult job, Leyton Orient, down there. But I worked for a chairman called Tony Wood, who owned the whole club. And I was able to establish a great relationship with him. So I never had any problem. But in Manchester City, we had 2 or 3 groups who all had 20, 25, 25%, something like that. And there was infighting going on all the time. Having said all that, I didn't do myself justice. I didn't do the job justice either. I let the whole situation get to me, if you like, and I lost really what I was about and what I was wanting to do. So I'm not making excuses. I take a large degree of the blame that it didn't work out. But the way I was sacked, obviously, the way I heard about it was really typified the club. I'd just driven to Sunderland the night before to watch Sunderland play because they were our next game. Got home about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Got up to go into training, turned the radio on, and there it was. Joe Royle is being appointed manager of Manchester City today. All right, okay. That's good news. Then I got a phone call about 20 minutes later from Francis Lee saying, can you call in my house on your way to the ground? That's how I found out, which is very disappointing. But typically the way the club was at that time.
Is it a lonely job being a manager, Frank? Are you on a bit of an island, or are there people you can lean on?
Can be. I'm sure Paul would agree with that. It can be a lonely job because ultimately you're the man who's making the decisions. Sometimes when you're sat on that bench and you're 3-0 down at home and all the staff were edging away from you on the bench and you knew the chairman was up in the box not too happy and telling all his mates what a useless manager you were, it could get a bit lonely. But it is important, obviously, the staff that you have, they can be a great help. You can't do it just on your own. It's just not possible.
Is that what you found, Paul? Now you're kind of in the other camp as well as the supporting player to Nathan Jones. Is that something that you take pride in, that you can help him from experience yourself?
I try to. Primarily, that's why I'm there to help him. And he's, for me, he's doing very well, and so we've been sort of round about each other for the last 7 years because I employed him at Charlton as under 23 coach, and then he brought me in 2016. So I can see that there is progression in everything he does, and he's an example of what we've been talking about the work ethic and the production line, the presentations, the tactical nous and all that sort of stuff, especially at a club where I think we've got the second lowest budget. We've got a great bunch of lads, and he helps them through his strategies and tactics. They go out there well armed, and so I'm really not proud of what I've done. I'm proud of what I see in terms of and what he's trying to achieve. And it's management is more complex now. I think managing players is not easy. We're different. We Frank and I are different. We were different as players and different in things we want and how we get, perhaps sometimes go about getting it. So there's been many changes, and you have to go with the changes.
How do you go about managing players then, Paul? And how has that evolved? Because David Prutton was on here a while ago, and he said you were lovely, you did a lot for his career, but you could be a bit scary. Have you had to evolve your approach to dealing with players, Paul, or not over time?
Well, I think when you say scary, it's I think if he could qualify that, it would be this is the way I think anyway. As a youth development coach, because he came through with me as well, I demanded certain things, and it wasn't all about football. It was about how to look after your money, how to behave, manners, yes please, no thank you. So I lived amongst them, and I cared about them, and when you care, you create an environment of trust. And I tried to do that in management. It's not always easy. I mean, the two wonderful experiences I had with senior players were keeping Portsmouth up and Crystal Palace. And I was in those jobs really for 3 months. And they were two of the best experiences I've ever had, especially Crystal Palace, where, they'd gone from top 6 and through the financial situation had been docked 10 points or 12 points and found themselves in the bottom 4 for the best part of the season. And we strove to make them better. And I just listened to the players. In fact, Sean Derry came to me, and I was going away saying that we'll do this. And Sean came to me and says, "Boss, and we've got a friendship now, Sean and I." And he says, "Do you think we could just do this because we know that?" And I said, "Absolutely, absolutely." And we went and we did what the players were comfortable with, and we retained our status in the Championship because of that intervention by the captain. And because I was probably 10 years further on or whatever, I listened. And, it happened, and everybody was happy.
Mm-hmm. Did you have that at Forest, Frank, with Pierce and people like that?
Paul's hit the nail on the head there, really. Man management is the key to everything, really. There's obviously a certain degree of tactics. You've got to know what you're doing. But man management is the absolute most important part of the whole job, I think. That was Brian Clough's greatest strength. I'm sure Paul would agree. He was a fantastic man manager in his own way. A complete natural at it. He'd never taken a course on it, or he'd never read a book about it. He just had an instinct of doing things right. And you have to do that. I mean, I had when I went to Forest, I ended up with a group of very, very good senior players. Pierce, especially, who was a captain and was a great captain for me whilst I was there. Colin Cooper and Steve Chettle. They were the three who I lent quite heavily on, especially when I was having to deal with Stan Collymore, who was a bit of a problem sometimes. In fact, was a bit of a problem most of the time. And I lent on them very heavily to help me in dealing with them, because I could have fined them every week. But that would have been self-defeating. So I kind of nursed them along, as I say, with the help of those three players. and we got 2 fantastic years out of him, you know. So man management is absolutely vital.
Is man management harder now, Paul? Do you think, with the way society changes, has it become more of a challenge?
The dressing room looks so different now. You know, we got certainly in the top 2 divisions there are more foreign players where they can be different, and so you have to tailor our humour. Probably that's why they employ foreign managers, because they're, I mean, if you look at, I think when the Premier League started, I think it was 75%, 25% British and foreign. Now I think it's almost turned turtle and the opposites there. It's so management skills. Our manager speaks Spanish. He's got a smattering of French. It helps. I'm not saying that's the. Most managers that come over are speak English, but it is different. It is different, and you have to tailor. You have to be clued in to the differences that take place within the dressing room.
Mm-hmm. Obviously another big difference today, especially at the top level, of course, you're dealing with a dressing room full of millionaires.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
And that makes the job much more complicated. You can't tell them to, when I say jump, you've got to persuade them that jumping is good for them.
Yeah.
Otherwise they'll say, I'll tell you, I'll give you a great example. When I played at Forest, I played with Kenny Burns, as you know, and we played Manchester City at the City Ground one night, and Burnsy had the ball on the edge of our penalty area. Now, in those days, if you remember, you could just pass it back to the goalkeeper. Shilton would pick it up and put it down the field. Kenny thought he'd be clever, and he tried to chip it to me, standing on the corner of the 18-yard box. Now, that was the last place I wanted it anyway. But he tried to chip it, and Dennis Stewart, who was playing for Man City, threw himself at the ball, but just could get a glancing header on it. And it went out for a goal kick, and nobody thought anything of it. We came off the pitch at half-time, and Brian was waiting with an envelope for Kenny Burns. He gave him the brown envelope, a fine of £50 for doing something stupid. He'd got the secretary out of the box to go and get this letter done. And Kenny just paid it.
Oh, dear.
Just paid it like that. I don't think he'd get away with that today.
No. Well, you wouldn't get away with it now because centre-backs have the highest pass rate in the team, going square, back, square.
Yeah, that's true enough, yeah.
Oh, dear.
Go forward.
What difference does not having fans make? You're not having fans and you're back in the ground. Does that change the way your teams are playing, do you think, now?
I think we've got used to it. It's like when there's huge crowds, you're attuned to the noise, and it's just there. So equally, I think players have got attuned to that. But we had, if you remember, just before Christmas, for the last lockdown, we had 1 week 1,000 and then 2,000 in, and of course at Kenilworth Road, it's brilliant. It was absolutely superb. It made such a difference, and our ground's really tight and all that. So it almost felt like we had a full house. It was brilliant. It made such a difference, So we've got to say, look, we've got to get them back in as soon as it's safe. And yeah, absolutely.
Do you think teams are more conservative without fans in the ground roaring them on?
I don't know. I've seen some wonderful performances. I've seen some, watch the Premier League, and I can switch the Premier League off as well because some games are poor. But I would hazard a guess that those games might be poor with a full house as well. I just think some teams in the Premiership are negative, but and they have to be. Don't get me wrong. It's self-preservation, but. I've heard, some people blaming poor performances on, wish we were there. I'm not sure. I think professionals get a grip. Might just have a little bit left out of it, but I can't really, no, I don't think so.
One thing I wanted to ask you both about, as I said before we started recording, is about team talks and if they're a bit of an art. I mean, Frank, what did you try and convey in team talks? Was everyone some big Chichilian speech that tried to raise spirits, or did you try and do something different?
No, I left that to Pacey. I don't think the team talk before the team actually go out in the dressing room is that important, really. I mean, all the work, I'm sure Paul would agree with that. I've been out a long time now, but I'm sure they still do it. All the preparation would have been done long before 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. I mean, you ask about learning things from people. Brian's team's talks were legendary. He very rarely said anything. He would come in just before the bell went, and he would pick the ball up and say, "This is a ball. When you get it, keep it." End of story. So there are all kinds of different ways. Unless you're that kind of individual, this great up and atom stuff is vastly overplayed. I think it was never something that I did.
No, I agree with Frank. I think our dressing room at Nottingham Forest was get your legs stretched out. It was the quietest dressing room I've ever been in. He opened the door so the opposition could see us, just stretched out, quiet, looking daggers at them as they walked past, and then that was it. Get out and do your job. But I totally agree with Frank. I think the work's done. Back end of the week work has been done. Little reminders are put there. I think the biggest team talk is half time, where you may have to adjust or change or calm things down or whatever. I think the main prep for the manager is when he goes in at half time. Where are we? What have we done? That sort of thing. I think that's the most important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the other danger is, and I found this when I first started, is saying too much.
Yeah.
You talk for the sake of it. Like 15 minutes is quite a long time, really. And I think you've got to be careful that you don't try and overdo it. Obviously, you're right, depending on how the game's gone, there are some things that you need to say and need to adjust. But you just have to be careful that you don't overdo it, And when the 15-minute half-time thing came in, I kind of deliberately developed a method, if you like, of saying nothing for 5 minutes, literally. Just get in the dressing room, the players do what they've got to do. Most of them would go to the toilet, maybe change their boots or do this or have a shout at each other, and just let them all settle down, and then try and say what you wanted to say in that 10 minutes rather than stretching it out.
Yeah, I agree. 15 minutes is far too long. 10 minutes is probably too long for most of us, and it's what you say. And I think the halftime talk is you've got to be insightful, direct, and positive.
What about post-match? Because you see these videos of Warnock's meltdowns after Sheffield United games. One I can think of, and that Leyton Orient one with I can't remember his name. One of your many successors, Frank. But managers going mental at players. How do you two view a post-match team talk? Do you just tell the players to go home and forget about it and come back the next day, or do you two go mad at them?
After a game, it was very dangerous to let one go, to let rip, because when we were managing, we had less analysis, and even more so now with analysis, you can always, until you've seen it, you can be slightly wrong in your assessment and all that. So I've prepared. Me personally, I didn't go crazy after a game, and certainly not for any length of time. And I wasn't very. I didn't get personal at all.
Yeah, I tried to do that, the same kind of thing. You're right, Paul. The analysis wasn't as thorough in those days, but there was always something that you could look at over 24, 36 hours. And I always felt that losing, and you thought you'd played badly, you'd never played as badly as you really thought you had, and winning, you'd never played as well as you thought you had, So it was better to have a period of introspection, if you like, and really go over it and think about it yourself before you start telling the players either what they did right or what they did wrong. Because obviously, the worst thing is to start telling people what they did wrong, and they didn't, It was something else. So I think that's right. I mean, that was the approach I tried to adopt.
How much has analysis changed the game, Paul, when you're working in it now day to day? I see Luton have just taken on another analyst. Is it a different game now in that sense, with all stats and everything?
Yes, it is. I have to do set pieces, and I work with an analyst on those. And but for instance, Chris Cohen, who has just come in, he's brilliant, and the manager absolutely brilliant at dissecting a game, or in Chris's case, just taking the detail out of training or a game and reviewing it with players is, for me, second to none. And I'm learning from them. They're absolutely top drawer, and it plays a huge part. And of course, if you can imagine the Premiership now, where if you're Manchester City or Liverpool playing FA Cup games, Premier League games, Champions League, there's very little time you can get out on the grass, So I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine a lot of the work is done in the lecture room and through video analysis.
What role did analysis play when you were managing them, Frank? Was it more in the back burner type thing then?
Yeah. We didn't get every game videoed. There wasn't that many games on television, so it was just done with the staff, really. You'd gather the staff around and talk about it, and discuss it, and try and come out with the positives. I do worry sometimes about the game today. I think the game is drowning in analysis and statistics. Paul might disagree with me because I'm on the outside. I'm a dinosaur. I'm on the outside looking in. But you're talking about being a manager today. I sometimes feel a bit sorry for the lads today. They've got to go through all these courses, do all these exams. They've got to know how to do a PowerPoint presentation, or you won't get a job. Because the game's still the same. You've got to win football matches. But you've got to be able to pass exams. You've got to get all the qualifications. But when it all boils down to it, you've still just got to win football matches. That's how you keep your job.
Yeah, I must admit, I see expected goal tables and expected assist tables. Really, there's only one table that counts, and that's the league table. So you do feel there's quite a lot of emphasis on it. Do you think it's too much, Paul, or not? Or do you see the benefits of analysis?
No, I see the benefits, but I'm also, and I've seen how it works well, from a teaching point of view, from a strategic point of view. I think, and like you, Frank, and by the way, you are not a dinosaur by any stretch of the imagination, but if he had another word, I'd fall into the same category. And I think that we are led by expectations. So, for instance, if we signed a player from Manchester City, I think he would expect to see what he's had at his previous club if he was a, and I think we are led by people who succeed, and I haven't got an inkling into what happens at the big clubs, but I would imagine that they operate in this way.
The last area I wanted to touch on before I let you both go is we talked about dealing with owners and dealing with players. The other thing is dealing with the media and people like me. But feel free to say what you want. What role do you think the media plays, Frank? And what was your experiences of dealing with them at different clubs? Did it vary from club to club?
Well, I mean, that side of the job has changed like 1,000,000%. I mean, the Premier League managers they've got to come out and contractually they've got to come out and do an interview within 10, 15 minutes of the game. They've got the national press to deal with, the local press to deal with, foreign press to deal with, and the spotlight on the game is just intense and unforgiving. Newspaper journalists have changed. When I played and when I was a manager, I was friendly with a lot of pressmen, reporters, and I could trust them. Nowadays, it just seems as though and I don't blame the reporters, they're being put under pressure by the editors, who are being put under pressure by their owners. They're all looking for scandal and looking for stories that will do the club down. So it's a very, very difficult job for managers to deal with the media today. I think, fortunately, most of the big clubs, I'm not sure, Paul, the budget that you're on at Luton would run to this, but most of the big clubs have a full-time press officer. Part of his job or her job is to help the manager deal with the increasing demands of the media.
I had a brilliant man at Portsmouth who led on the way to the press room after a game, would lead me through what he was expecting people to say. He was brilliant, and he got it. He very rarely got it wrong. But I'm not the one. I'm really a poor person to ask about the media, because I have a friend in television who said to me, she a lady, and she said to me, "You've got to sharpen up. You've got to answer the questions a little bit quicker," because I think I'm paranoid, and I think I'm so worried about what I would say that I have to think about the question. I mean, to be fair, in my defence, I've always been like that, a bit slow. But
you learned that from Hart Wilkinson.
It doesn't come across well when you're on the telly, but I do have to think about the answer, and so where an interview he might want to get it over with in a couple of minutes, probably takes about 10 with me. But it is so important to get it right, and that's I'll be perfectly honest about my situation, but it is important that you project. I think you have to tell a story to get onto your. So I think you, as a manager, have to learn how to run the interview. And I'm 67 now, and it still escaped me.
When you say run the interview, is that you want to get your message across then, and we're trying to get what we want out of you? Is it a bit of a game of chess, do you think?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
Do you kind of think managers shouldn't have to do these press conferences straight after games because feelings might be heated and you might say the wrong thing or something you don't want to say then, Frank?
Well, ideally, but I do understand the television companies pay an awful lot of money to the game to be given this kind of access, and we have to, as an industry, we have to accept that their demands are sometimes going to make it difficult for the managers. Obviously, it would be much easier for the managers if he had and you could sit for an hour and really think about it. But that's no good to the television company, so we have to accept that it's part of the trade-off, you know.
You agree?
Obviously, it would be much easier if he was able to relax for an hour and have a drink and a beer and compose himself, but that's no good for the television company. So we have to do it. All the managers have to do it.
You agree then, Paul? You'd rather not speak to the media quite as often if you were a manager?
No, I fully understand. I agree with Frank totally. It's here and it's we have to manage it. But a lot of mistakes, even by the top managers, have been made in that 35-minute period after a game is finished. And ordinary human beings like me are not the only ones to have made mistakes in that period because of the emotion. Top managers like Sir Alex or Pep Guardiola, it's understandable. I'm sure Frank does. We look at them and think, yeah, I'm sort of saying, oh, I'm so pleased, Mr. Guardiola, that you've got totally annoyed on this one because it makes us all feel a bit human.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember as a manager when you're doing an interview for the media, you have to be aware of what your audience is, and there are several parts to it. Obviously, the person who is doing the interview, like yourself, Matt, you're talking to him directly, but your directors are listening to you, your players are listening to you, and your supporters are listening to you. So you've got to be aware of all those different parts of the audience who are going to hear your interview, and it's very, very difficult in that period straight after a game when you're all wound up, and but it's something that we have to do, or managers have to do.
Frank talks there about talking to players through the media. One thing I wanted to ask before I let you go is about losing a dressing room and when a job is kind of going wrong and you are perhaps on the way out. Do you know when things have gone wrong and you've lost the dressing room, Paul, or is there a moment where you think, oh hell, this is all gone and I'm about to get the bullet, or not?
I think I probably only felt maybe once that the players were drifting, but getting the sack, do you know when it is? Well, based on results, you can hazard a bit of a guess, but no, I think you at all times you've got to try and change. Losing the dressing room, I only heard about that about 15 years ago, losing the dressing room. It was foreign to me until I heard the phrase through the media. And I thought, wow, how does that happen? But it does happen, and I recognise it. If you lose it, can you get it back? What are the reasons for losing it? Is it you, or is it a bad influence within the dressing room? It can be either, both. Trying to address it is not easy, I would have thought.
Can you get it back? Because you can't just sell a player these days because of transfer windows and money in the game, and it's a lot easier to sack a manager. Can you get a dressing room back, do you think, or not?
Well,
I'll tell you how to get it back.
Go on, Frank.
Win the next two matches.
I was just going to say, winning a football match doesn't have to keep people quiet. It's and that's what Nottingham Forest. What you've got. Win a football match, it shuts everybody up.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of rubbish talk about losing the dressing room. And what you've got to remember is, in a dressing room, you might have, there are only like 15, 16 people who are going to be involved. So you've got another 10 or 12 or maybe more. I mean, when I was at Manchester City, I had 40-odd pros.
Yeah.
40-odd full professionals. More than 50% of whom knew they were never going to get a game. So, you've got to deal with them. an old manager, I can't remember who it was, once said, the key to keeping the dressing room is keeping the 12 who are playing who hate you apart from the others who aren't playing who despise you. So it's this dressing room thing is vastly overplayed. If you win a couple of football matches, that solves the problem for you. But like as Paul said, there will be issues in the dressing room because you've got all different personalities in there. And the ones who aren't playing, the ones that you don't pick, they could be very quickly become a problem that you have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And the way I dealt with it, I try to be honest with everybody. I'm sure every manager would say the same. You try to be straight and honest with the people who aren't playing. Brian was very, very good at this, although it was easy for him because when I played, we only had 16. Yeah. The team squad of 16. So you always felt involved, even if you weren't actually in the 11, Paul,
Yeah.
Like that 16 for 2 years virtually travelled as a group to every game. Yeah. Now it's much different. It was the biggest problem for me at Manchester City. So many players who were never going to get a game, couldn't move them on because they were on big money by championship standards because they were at Manchester City, who were paid good money, but good wages. So it's a never-ending problem. Problems could come from anywhere in the dressing room, but you got to win football matches. That changes the whole atmosphere of the club.
Mm-hmm. Is managing actually an enjoyable job, and does it become a bit of a drug in a sense that you're just chasing that next win, or you can't let it go and you always want to get back in, Paul?
I think I've had to come to terms over the last few years that I have a different role to play in football, and I suppose my success has been with youth development, and on at least 2 occasions I've been taken into management through being at a club and doing youth development. So I think I've only had 1 interview for a job. How I've got the others, I haven't got a clue. I can't remember. But it's football's a wonderful game, but it's tough and relentless.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is it enjoyable, Frank, when being a manager, do you think?
Oh, parts of it are enjoyable. Winning, when you win a game, it's enjoyable. But I always say to young managers today, it's a very, very difficult job. The media, social media, all the outlets, people have to vent their some of the things that people are having to deal with today on social media is absolutely disgraceful. The one good thing about no spectators is that the managers aren't getting abused by the supporters in the crowd because there's nobody there. But they're all going on social media instead. I say to managers, would-be managers, it's a very, very difficult job. Mm. As I said earlier, you've got to really want to do it. It has pluses, of course. I talked about that manager on £15 million. If you can survive for a number of years and work your way up, you could come out of it. Nowadays, there's a very, very wealthy man, which is important. I know money's not everything, but it's important. But it's a lot of the job is not very pleasant. You try to ignore it, but listen, I've got to tell you, no matter what people say, it's not a very pleasant experience when people are howling at you, shouting for you to be sacked, this kind of thing, and the other. Your family cop for it, I mean, when I came to Forest, my daughter came up with me and went to Nottingham High School. And the first 4 months of my time here weren't very good at all. And she got, she had a really tough time to get through all that. So they're all kind of things you've got to consider. That's why I'm saying you really, really you need to want to do the job, you know.
So, last question.
I'll just say, Paul is unique, really, in the game, I think, and that he's moved up and down the coaching hierarchy in a way that I don't think anybody else has ever really managed to do. As he said, he made his initial reputation as a fantastic academy director at Nottingham Forest. But he's been a manager, then he's gone back to youth development, then he's been another manager, then he's been assistant. It speaks volume for him, I think, as a person and as a coach, because paranoia is rife in football. All managers are paranoid. I don't care what they say. Some are more paranoid than the others. And a lot of managers I've known over the years would be very, very reluctant to hire somebody for their youth development scheme who had shown an ambition to be a manager, and vice versa. Paul is he's managed to do it, and as he said, he was 67. He's been in the game a long, long time. He's obviously a brilliant coach and a great bloke.
Last question, because you've led into it there nicely, Frank. If you could go back to late 80s, Frank Clark and Paul Hart, before you got into management, would you tell yourselves, sod it, do something else, or would you relive it all again, the whole management careers that you've had?
Well, I would relive it. I wanted to do it. It was a wonderfully self-fulfilling way of being employed. It wasn't all roses all the way, but even my time at Leyton Orient, which was my first managerial job, was incredibly difficult. I was working crazy hours. I had no staff. Well, I had a physio and a player coach, and that's all I had initially. I was working ridiculous hours. The club were close to going out of business every couple of months. But when I look back on it, it was an incredible experience. Worked with some wonderful people, made some really good friends, not just at Orient, right throughout my managerial career. So no, I wouldn't have swapped it. I'd have done some things differently, hopefully better, but I wouldn't have changed most of it.
What about you, Paul? Would you have done it all again?
I've been in 51 years in the summer. If you saw me play and you've seen my management skills, you would say I'm a lucky man. I think I am a lucky man. I've been privileged to there, and as Frank says, great friends. We have, when we meet for coffee with John Robertson and that, the Mickey taking is relentless, and it's unique. The memories, players I've played with, great players, managers I've had, fantastic. The help I've been given by my staff, by fellow professionals. I've been privileged, and I would do it again tomorrow.
I just wanted to finish with a plug for
Yeah, it's frozen. Can you hear me, Paul?
I can hear you, Frank.
Oh, we're back.
The pressure of being an interviewer got to you, see.
Sorry for any technical problems at the end there with the connection, internet problems in the pandemic world. I just wanted to finish this week's podcast mentioning a friend of the show and a friend of Paul and Frank in Gary Birtles, whose wife Samantha has cancer, and they're doing a fundraising drive for her for Treetops Hospice, which has raised over £4,000 already, with friends and family walking 20 miles or just donating if you can't contribute to the walking effort yourself. So I'll put links to that on my pinned tweet, which is at @MattDavis_NP. DAVIES, or you can also find a link to it at the Nottinghamshire Live website, and hopefully people can donate something, because Gary's such a really wonderful bloke, and everyone here loves him, and I know Forest fans love him too, and people said a lot of lovely stuff about his wife, so it'd be great to support them if we can. As ever, do give the podcast a rating on iTunes. 5 out of 5 would be nice, and subscribe there, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with a more normal episode, looking ahead to the Derby game and looking back on recent matches as Forest look to steer clear of relegation. Thanks to Frank and Paul for their insights there on management. It was a really wonderful episode. I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you for listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for listening.